Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Bouncing Back YouTube video with me, Chris Manley. Really pleased that you're here. Have you ever thought why some of the most difficult situations lead to the most positive change? Personal growth can be found in the most surprising places. I'm currently going through that personal journey, and I find it absolutely fascinating, the things that you put in place. Have it in a response to that difficult situation, and often you actually feel that much better. And I like to think that it is a form of bouncing back. And what I'd like to do over the course of a few videos is get to know a few people, learn from their experience, and ultimately, for anybody that's watching, can be inspired by that, or maybe gain some tools. And then what we'd like to do is sort of then lead that into sort of maybe some day-to-day life, perhaps in work. Could we make it relevant to leadership skills and communication that might improve all of our day-to-day life? So I'm absolutely chuffed to bits to have Ed Towers here. Hi, Ed. How are you?
Good, thank you, Chris. Yeah, very well.
So just for everyone in the audience, sort of, just tell us a little opener about yourself, where you're from, etc. Sounds a bit like a blind date thing, but I think it's good for those that don't know you.
Sure. I'm a dairy farmer from Lancashire. I work here on my family's dairy farm, and I tell people that my parents own the assets and I own the debt. We've got a team of around 5 people on the farm, and a lovely lady called Kim who helps me in the office. And we're a little bit unconventional, so we sell our milk to mainly into coffee shops all up and down the country, but into London with the majority of it. And we do some tricky or unusual stuff as a dairy farmer. I like to think I'm not a very stereotypical dairy farmer.
That's good. No, and people might be thinking, well, why would I have asked Ed to be the first one to come here? Well, generally, number one, because you're quite up for most things that are different or new. But what always sticks in my mind is any conference that I've been to or been in the audience, and me and you often would ask questions, but what stands out is you've always, when there's been a sort of leader from a company or various businesses, people have asked all the normal questions, but then you would say, please, can you tell us about a time when you had a difficult situation or a crisis, and how did you respond? And I thought, wow, that's perfect for the man that asked that question. This is totally relevant to the whole Bouncing Back YouTube channel. And could you sort of, this is a relatively safe space, although it's going public potentially. Could you just share with us a sort of a difficult time for you, and just sort of how that sort of played out at the time?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I just love that question, because it's not necessarily something specific about that presentation, but it often they'll think for a little while and come up with like a really good story about when the muck hit the fan and things are really tight, or they might tell you just how difficult things were. And generally, because they're up there and they're speaking to you, or usually a big or successful business, the answers normally a similar pattern was, well, yeah, this happened and we got busy and we did this and we had plan A, B, C, D, and E, and we did all these different things, and we really stuck at it. And I just, quite often when you go and see these talks, they just tell you about, it just seems like they've gone in a straight line from, a small business to a massive business, and everything's been easy and successful, and they never had any kind of hiccups or even potentially business ending, or even, and it's so ambiguous. Sometimes they'll tell you about a personal challenge that they've had to put up with, or a divorce or something like that. And so it's interesting to see how people take the question, and also for me, that really, they just stand up there and they look like superheroes because they've achieved so much. And
it's like they're not human, isn't it? That's when you look at them. It's like, they can't have any normal person issues.
No, or they've obviously just not come across the sort of hiccups that I seem to come across all the time. So I guess it seems to humanize them in my mind when they actually say, oh yeah, well, this happened and it cost us this much money, or we nearly went bankrupt, or I had to come up with this solution for this problem. I won't give you any specific ones, because obviously they've been telling me that it's not appropriate to share it. But I find that the most fascinating, interesting part. And really, I think for them businesses, it's not actually been about the good deals and actually, you know, how easy it's been. It's been about surviving when they could have not survived. Like, surviving is more a remarkable thing than thriving to some extent. Obviously, a lot of the guys that are up there talking to us have both survived and thrived, but you can't thrive if you don't survive first. So that's probably more important than, you know, massive growth or great big profits. It's just continuing to exist. So often when you ask somebody what kind of the worst situation or the biggest drama they've been through is, that's been a survival situation. And that's, I always find them stories really interesting and makes me sometimes feel a little bit better about dramas that we have too.
No, that's fair. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And so, you know, just sort of take it to one of your sort of challenges. Maybe it should be the question that I should ask you, you know, tell me about a difficult time or situation for you, or your business, whatever it might be, and then how that affected you, and sort of, you know, what would be your, you know, tell me that story. That'd be brilliant.
So the biggest challenge I had, or I've had to overcome, is probably mentally, but it manifested itself or brought to the floor through a physical defect. So I had a problem with my hip when I was a child, and I'd gone off and played a lot of rugby and sport after that, and farmed because I was allowed to. The doctor said, "Yeah, you're fine to do that." Probably didn't quite expect me to get as carried away as I did, and it came about that after I came back to the family business following university. And for me, a lot of things compounded at the same time. You know, it doesn't rain, it pours, and everything hit the fan at the same time. So I'd been back in the family business for about 6 months. The family business wasn't doing very well. We were supplying milk locally, and the milk market was very poor, just at a time where my father had decided to make some investments prior to that, and pay back the debt in an ambitious cycle, because he wanted to do that within his lifetime or within his working life. So the business was going back fast. I've been back in the business about 6 months, aware that what we were doing wasn't working. And then, so we'd made some changes, taken some risks, and bought a load of Jersey cows to produce a different milk, into a brand new market, a diversified product. And then my hip stopped working, and I ended up in really serious chronic pain. And then during that winter of 2015-16, we were also getting floods. And so, you know, it was a really wet time for us in this area. So there might be water flowing through the farm every week. Just seemed that the chronic pain was enough of a problem to deal with, full stop. But I was kind of getting layer on layer on layer of problems. It just seemed to be a difficult time. At the beginning, chronic pain wasn't. It was painful. It wasn't very pleasant, but it's more like holding a weight out at full arm strength. This doesn't feel very heavy, and it's not very heavy, and I could probably hold it for quite a while. But if I've got to hold it there for days and weeks and months and years, my arm's going to hurt. And for me, that chronic pain, it was a little bit. I describe it as it was like having toothache 24/7. No one could hear it. No one could feel it. No one could see, you know, a wound or anything. Or it was like having a burning piece of coal in your pocket, and you just had to get by. And my identity about that time was all about, you know, being a really hard worker and working all these hours. And, you know, I'd work how many hours, and then I'd go off and play rugby, and then I'd come back and I'd play the hardest on the pitch. And it was all about being determined and just trying harder and harder. And the solution to every problem up to that point in my life was just putting more hours in or trying harder. And suddenly, it was like pushing my thumb against a nail. The more I pushed, the more it hurt. And because I was so young, the advice was to get a hip replacement. 2 weeks after I stopped playing rugby because I couldn't sprint at a game, went for an X-ray, and the doctor was like, "Yeah, you've got a hip of an old man and it needs replacing." But you're only, I don't know, 24, 25. So try and put it off as long as you can, because the later it goes in, the longer you'll have it for.
And how did that sort of news, you know, because bear in mind that things have been piling on top of themselves. How did you take that news at the time, the thought of a replacement hip?
I was devastated. Not necessarily because I needed to get a new hip, more because I couldn't play rugby. So I worked and played rugby, but playing rugby twice a week at training with senior friends, and then you go and play on a Saturday, and then you'd have a night out with them. So it was very much my social life and my and work. So I had them two things, and I actually felt like I had a great balance, and life was good, and that was an okay thing for me at that time. And then the rugby stopped, but that meant also my social life had stopped. And I didn't want to turn up, and the other thing you do when you play rugby is usually drink quite a bit. But if you don't play rugby and turn up, then you just drink. And it got to the stage, because of my chronic pain, if I drank, anything could happen. I'd either be crying, or I'd do something wild or stupid or something that was going to end up getting me into a lot of trouble. So that wasn't a good solution. I
can't imagine you doing anything like that, Ed, at all.
Yeah. So sometimes there's flashbacks, but quite often now it's just I'm quite confident to do something funny or entertaining, rather than drive home or something really out of order like that.
That's good. And just teasing out a little bit on the, often, like, for many people, regardless of the subject, that there is that feeling of when, like, little by little there's little things that sort of add up until you get to sort of should we say, a breaking point, for want of a better phrase. Like, do you have any thought, like, having been through that, and no doubt you still will go for that type of experience again when things are busy, but have you any thoughts on, like now, are you more self-aware of, like, some of the, like, those things piling up and how you organise them? Or any thoughts to share on that when people feel that they've got a lot on their plate?
Yeah, I'm aware I'm not bulletproof. I'm not invincible. Where it's actually, like, sounds ridiculous, but I thought I could take on any amount of work and any amount of challenges, and then all of a sudden I couldn't. And that was a novel thing for me. That was unusual. So now I'm aware of that, and then I got into reading books. I got into self-help. I got into self-improvement, and especially with my hip. As an example, I was trying to find any solution to put off and to help me deal with the pain, whether that was yoga or acupuncture or Reiki or any sort of weird and wonderful solution that might have been out there. I was prepared to try it, and that's kind of the same. You can apply that to all sorts of problems that you've got, whether they're a physical health problem like I had, or whether it's whether it's just a logistical problem or something that you might have in business anyway. So just that willingness to try any idea from any area and apply it to your specific problem. So probably the most absurd or real example for me was I couldn't physically milk. I couldn't walk up and down the parlour or do the twisting. I could, but maybe half an hour later I'd be, there'd be veins popping out of my forehead, and I'd be in a lot of pain and really battling on to do it. And for us, it would take about 3 hours, and it was just something that wasn't a good idea to do. And if I'd done 3 hours work, I might need to be in bed for 5 hours after to try and recover from that. And so a friend of mine, her little brother used to clear the kitchen table to the sink on a Segway that they got for Christmas. And he'd go to the kitchen, he'd go to the sink, and then he'd turn around and he'd grab some plates and he'd go back. And I thought, well, that's not too different to me and my milking parlour. We've got a swing over milking parlour. So I bought a Segway off Amazon, and I chucked it down in the milking parlour and had a go at milking on it. And I've been milking on it ever since, even though I've got a replaced hip, but it meant I could then do it. So that's kind of an example of just, if it might work, well, I'll give it a go. And if it doesn't, and it's not going to bankrupt you, then big deal.
And, and actually, with that specific example, I can imagine once you got good at it, things were getting quicker, weren't they? I would have thought. I've got a replaced hip now and could milk, no problem at all. But I still do it on the Segway. My herds lady Janet, she milks on the Segway. My dad milks on the Segway, and he hasn't got any hip troubles, so to speak, yet. Anyway, so hopefully it's. For us in our little parlour, in our scenario, it's actually better than being on my legs. That'll go about six miles an hour. Well, if you were to rush up and down the parlour at 6 miles an hour, your cows would be upset, and you'd be absolutely knackered after milking for 2 or 3 hours. So this, you just lean and it does the work for you. So
that's like an example of a stupid idea or a silly thing that because of this mindset of looking for solutions to problems, we now do, and it works for us.
Yeah, it's brilliant to hear. And I mean, I was thinking, like, as I'm sort of traveling through the journey of just trying different things myself, and it's funny because obviously for some people it's, it'll be definitely difficult to do a couple of things. You can understand whatever position they might be in, but for me, in a way similar to you, like I go, I'll really go for it and try a few different things. You almost can nearly overdo it, and the kind of the other way. But having said that, you've got to try some things to find out what works for you. I mean, have you got any thoughts on, how you sort of pick the things that kind of help you? I mean, I guess there's some generic advice, but I mean, what do you think?
Well, I was obviously with my physical hip problem, it was okay. Well, you start with physio. Physio wasn't working. It was just, it was bone, not muscle. So that didn't work. And then it was okay. Well, what next? And so I kind of started off with the mainstream solutions, probably got a little bit extreme and weird towards the end. But what I didn't want to do was get my hip replaced and then think, oh, well, why didn't I try that? Or why didn't I try this? So yeah, I think when you've gone as far as hypnotherapy and to them sorts of extremes of trying different solutions, acupuncture, people burning herbs on me and doing all sorts of, being in village halls with I don't know, doing Pilates with a load of retired women, and I'm the only, I'm a young rugby player in there just trying it to see if it can help me ease my pain. It's just, I wasn't afraid to try weird and different things. But what I also did is that there wasn't many people my age that had that problem. But any that did, I wanted to get in contact with, or someone that had been through that and say, well, what's worked for you? So there was, groups on Facebook with similar problems, and auntie of mine knew a friend of a friend that had a hip replacement below 30, so they got in touch, and I could talk to them and see what had worked for them, what hadn't worked for them. But I was probably more of a scattergun approach. Just for me, it was more of, I felt like I tried everything. I was never going to say, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. Like now, absolutely 100% sure that if anything, I put it off getting that replaced far too late, and I should have done it much sooner. But it was just my character to be determined, try other stuff. But I caused myself, spinal problems and more mental problems through trying to put off that hip replacement.
Yeah, well, you can say you're now just like Andy Murray. You're just technically a high-performing athlete. That's the excuse. He had a whole Amazon series on that. So, I mean, who knows? We're starting here with you, but
we'll see where we get to.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I guess the key point, like when you're feeling, I guess crap or not so well about things, some things are getting on top of you. Like, what do you think? Like, can you what is sort of the absolute sort of like turning point, the corner in which you're like, I'm really going to get on this now. I'm going to, not rest on my laurels. What do you think for, what turned the corner in sort of thinking, actually, I'm going to do something about this?
I know this video or this series, you've called it bounce back, but for me, it wasn't a bounce back. It was the problems that I'd generated through putting off that hip replacement, through that chronic pain, and through the challenges we had in the business and that sort of stuff. It's been a fight back. It's been a battle back. It's not been hitting a trampoline and being back up in the air again. It's been a slog and slowly improving, or more like the 1% improvement every day gets you over 300 times better over a year sort of thing. It's been trying different things, reading books, getting more of a growth or a learning mindset, developing. I moved from being a worker, because that's what I did, and anytime there's a problem I just work harder, to my capacity to run this business is my ability to have a team and for them to do the work. And that, I think most people might learn that, but most people might learn that in their 50s or 60s, whereas I learned that 6 months into having a business, that my capacity to do work wasn't going to be my lever for success, because my capacity to do work had gone from what I thought was really good to nothing. So then I needed to learn how to prioritize, how to work out what work I could get somebody else to do relatively easily, and what work that actually I could do, whether that would be on a computer or thinking or talking to people and organizing stuff. And what my strengths are needed to change, because what was my strength became my big weakness.
Yeah, and so that's funny. You sort of you're obviously incredibly self-aware from it, and it sounds to me like you're talking about your knowing what your strengths are. How has that sort of played out actually when sort of with working in your family or in a business type environment, or even with friends or partners, in terms of has it been an advantage to know like where your strengths are, how you can work with other people? Is there anything you've learned through that? And it's not just because you have to, but also just from being like a better leader.
Yeah, I've been forced outside of my comfort zone through my comfort zone being no longer available to me, and nothing's in your comfort zone when you're in chronic pain. Because some of the things that I had to get over and deal with were, guilt of not being able to help or do the work that I used to be able to do, and then lack of confidence, because I was worried that before that was my identity. So now what's my identity, and developing that. And so I've become very, very aware of my own flaws and what I might not be as good at. But then I've also developed the ability to communicate that or be vulnerable. Whereas before, like I said, I thought I was Superman. I thought I was invincible. And then I wasn't vulnerable, but that actually meant that people couldn't relate to me anywhere nearly as well, because I wouldn't show it. I wouldn't want to show any weakness. Whereas actually with relationships with key other people in the business, or key suppliers or customers, if you're authentic and open and honest, and they can see that he's vulnerable, or he's wearing his heart on his chest, then you're more likely to make better connections, and they're more likely to want to work with you, because they don't just see this arrogant superhero who thinks that he's invincible.
No, I couldn't agree more. That it's funny that openness. It kind of, there's almost that perception. You think, oh, I need to be strong, therefore, if I'm confident, things will work out better. But actually, just being human, being vulnerable. I guess there's a way I almost feel that it kind of draws people towards you. Because most of us, if not everyone, has got something that's challenging them from time to time. Could we just tease out a little bit more on that sort of vulnerability, and just sort of explaining what that means to you, and also the importance of communication, like with that? And it's a very open question, so take it where you like. But I think there's definitely, that's not often something that's talked about.
Yeah, in terms of communication, effectively, when my body had gone, that's all I could do. It was communicate. It was communicate with suppliers, communicate with the team that I had working here. So that's what I had to then hopefully try and develop and get better at. Whether that was just listening to people more and then explaining what the outcome you wanted, but not. I thought from kind of seeing other businesses around that the way to run a business was to have a million phone calls and to be super busy all the time and to be micromanaging everything. But didn't have the capacity to do that either. And so I needed to learn how to communicate what we wanted the outcomes to be, and then to sit back and let people achieve that themselves or in their own way, even if it wasn't necessarily the way I would have done it. I don't know how much more I could go into the question about vulnerability, but I think I'm much more. I think it's easy for me to relate to other people, and for other people to relate to me when I'm more open, more vulnerable, and especially and I guess that's kind of what I'm asking when I ask that question to people who stood up on the stage and just told us about their super businesses. Can you tell me a time when you've been vulnerable, and or are you prepared to open up about a time that's been really difficult and tell us a story that's actually not all sunshine and roses. And I don't think people necessarily go to do a talk to a group of people and think, okay, I'm going to tell them about all of the bad things that have happened to me and how we overcome them. Although that's what I try and do if I go and do a talk somewhere. It's just, I'm more, well, we did this and then that happened that was really bad. So we did this and then that happened that was really bad. So we did this. Because I feel like that people would hopefully relate to that, or people might be able to take away something that's meaningful from the problems that I've had for them. And what's the point of going to do a talk if you're just going to tell them how great you are and not give them anything that they might find useful in the future?
Yeah, because everybody will tell the best possible story. No, I couldn't agree more. Okay, so I'd like to think, as part of what we're doing here is just, hope there'll be some people in the audience that will, be going through their own challenges. Have you got any sort of particular advice or one point that sort of worked for you? It may not work for others, but something that, what if someone was going through something difficult at the moment? Any sort of thoughts you'd share, advice at this time?
I've got a list. Mentors, mentors, coaches, whatever you want to call them, consultants, friends. But, like for me, mentors have been absolutely fantastic. I remember probably when I was quite low, a mentor coming to the farm and I said, look, is it this hard for everybody? Like, I'm finding this really, really difficult here. I'm really struggling. Is this normal? And he'd said, and such a simple thing. He said, well, look, you're trying to do something new. You're trying to do more of it. You're trying to do it better. You're in chronic pain and the market's in a place where we've not seen it, like in his whole entire life of 30 or 40 year career. So that for me, just, him telling me them four or 5 points, which were blindingly obvious, made me feel a little bit better about my situation. And then also, something that I was looking to, I needed help because I couldn't do the work myself. So I was just employing anybody that would come and work for us left, right and centre, and just ended up with a lot of people that were all, a lot of part-time people that meant well and were doing the best. But even just organising the rota and ringing everyone up to say, oh, can you cover this booking? And everyone was doing like a day or a day and a half, and it was spread randomly around the week. And so, my mentor was like, well, no, I think you probably need 5 full-time people, a few part-time for the weekend, and then you and Dad just organise it so that you're here to cover holidays and problems, holiday sickness and problems. So it's like, right, okay, work towards that. 12 months later, we got there or whatever, and it was like, well, this is a lot easier. Like, why have we not? So it's like having a mentor or somebody that can give you that sort of just like, and it's for them, it was just experience. It was just, well, this is kind of the size of your business, and this is probably what you need. Aim towards that. But otherwise, I might have gone from having all these part-timers to even more part-timers to sit down to a different number of people or up and down. And like, if you can take a shortcut through somebody else's advice rather than use the scattergun approach of trial and error, it's much better. And like, in terms of mentors as well, the difficult thing about getting a mentor is getting them. But if you find somebody that you find inspiring or who's achieved something or has a lifestyle that you want to achieve, just ask, because worst case scenario, they're flattered, but they don't have time or the capacity to do it, and they say no. But they're flattered, and you're in the same situation you were. And if they do say yes, and it's only a meeting or two or something like that, then great. But sometimes it can be a really deep and meaningful relationship, which takes you in leaps and bounds ahead of the rate that you would have made them improvements anyway. So mentors would definitely be one of them. I love reading books now, whether they're audio books or on YouTube at ×2 speed or actual physical books. That for me, books are better than articles. Anyone can write an article and it's more clickbait sort of thing. But if somebody sits down to write 300 or 400 pages of a book, generally they really know what they're doing and what they've got is worth sharing. And generally it's less faddy stuff, or it's stuff that's proven over the test of time, especially if it's a bestseller or that sort of stuff. So for me, reading books has been a big game changer, especially, I could list off a load of books now that have had a big impact. And another thing I would say with kind of getting on the self-help journey is that what you do to begin with is you make your life a bit worse, because when you first read a book, for example, like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, you're aware of all the stuff you're not doing that you should be doing.
Yeah.
And you actually put more stress on yourself, or you're aware of how life could be, but it's not. And it's a little bit like harvesting a crop of wheat. You can't do it without planting a seed. So kind of, I guess, reading the book is the genetic information for that plant that you're going to do. Then you've got to do the work and develop the habits, which I guess is planting the seed and then it growing. And you only actually harvest it, it might be 12 months, 2 years down the line, where you actually can see them habits, or that book that you've read is coming out through your subconscious and changing the way you behave. And so it's a short term makes things worse. And also when things are going badly and when you're under pressure or you've got a lot on or losing a lot of money, last thing you want to do is sit down and start reading a book. You feel like that's a bit putting the covers over your head and hiding from your problems. But so if you can start that habit of reading and develop tools, hopefully you'll not get to the situation where either you're losing a lot of money or things aren't going very well. So yeah, for me, it doesn't need to be a book, but or it doesn't need to be in a book format, but reading a book. I would advise people to read the general ones first. So, if you can read Unlimited Memory at first, and then every book you read after that, you'll be able to just remember all the tools for it. Or if you can read really basic principles, or basic kind of the basics of self-help, or learning how to learn maybe, then what you then read after that, you might be better to, if you go straight to the specific book that's on your specific problem, but you don't have the capacity to, or you don't have the ability to learn and develop habits, it probably won't change your life. You might be aware of what you need to do, but you might not have the tools to be able to do it. So, books like Atomic Habit, books like Unlimited Memory, might be best to read first to build, even though you haven't got the habits, or to build them habits or build that ability to improve would be better than just getting the knowledge on how to improve, but not having the right habits to apply it, I would say. Yes, books and mentors. One of the habits of Stephen, or one of the 7 habits of highly effective people on Stephen Covey book is be proactive. I guess that's something that I've had, is being proactive. And whether that's been asking for people for help or to read books, I've been trying stuff. I guess that's just about never giving up. And that was a trait that I would have thought was part of my definition beforehand. And that unlike hard work or unlike being physically active, will serve you well whatever the weather. If you're proactive and never giving up, that will work for you in nearly all circumstances. So you can have them, if you can pick kind of or you can have your own self-image with bits with things like that are appropriate, whatever, trying to have a positive mindset, being open to change, being determined, never giving up. They'll serve you well whatever is going on in your life or whatever problem you've got. Whereas some of the defining things that I had for me didn't serve me well when my body wasn't there. And you can't, if your body's not there, your mind can't be there. They're too interlinked. So yeah, when my physical pain hit me, I'd ended up with depression, anxiety, and all sorts of stuff that wasn't pleasant. I read a book recently actually that said that it explained to me some of the biology around psychology. So if you're in physical pain or you have a joint that's inflamed, that inflammation will then have an effect on your brain to make you, what you want to do is go to bed and put the covers over your head. And that is because when we evolved, we were actually in the middle of the food chain, not the top of the food chain. So if you had an injured joint and you're out in the open and being super positive and optimistic about life, you're actually unable to run away from predators and you get eaten. So evolutionary speaking, when we're in pain now, we still have the development where actually the best thing to do back then was to go into the back of the cave and hide in a dark place where you're less likely to be come across by a predator. So that's why evolutionarily, biologically, that's what the best response is, or that's what the response, but that's no longer appropriate to us now because we're at the top of the food chain.
Yeah, that obviously explains lack of activity on hangover days for many people. It's clearly our role in the food chain and how we've evolved. Ed, we've obviously covered so much. It's brilliant and actually given me so much energy for why we're doing this, because we've all got a story to share. For me, there's sort of a bit that everybody sort of strives for a happy life. The reality is actually it varies in terms of how you feel, depends what comes up. But if there was sort of one piece of advice that you'd sort of give to someone to sort of that makes a real difference for what I call maybe a happy and purposeful life, what would be that bit of advice?
Yeah, I would say, striving for a happy life isn't probably the solution. Life's hard. You have periods where you're in pain. You have periods where you lose family members, and we all die in the end anyway. So if you strive towards purpose, then you probably get the happiness out of achieving a purpose. We're all gonna suffer sooner or later, whether we like it or not. So if you can define a purpose and work towards that, that's so much better than actually striving towards being happy. Because if you're striving towards being happy, what are you? You're well fed, you're over rested, you're doing lots of stuff that's just luxury things to do, or you're drinking all the time, or a lot of very rich people or people that have been given lots of money, they're addicted to drugs, or they develop problems because they don't have necessarily that purpose there. So for me, it would be define a purpose. Fair enough, in that purpose, develop an idea of a lifestyle you want to have and work towards that. So like a lot of people will have a business and the business ends up growing then, or they're just focused on growth for the sake of growth, whether it's actually achieving a lifestyle that they want to have or not. And I think that's a terrible outcome. Like if you can define a purpose that you want to achieve in your lifestyle and work towards in your lifetime and work towards that, it makes the suffering worthwhile. Whereas if you're just looking for fun and enjoyment and then you hit the suffering, then what's the point of carrying on or coming up with a solution, because you haven't got any meaning behind it? So it would be really work towards a purpose, and hopefully you'll have fun watching yourself move towards achieving it.
Ed, honestly, thank you very much. I think for everybody watching, it's been truly inspiring. We really appreciate you being sort of vulnerable. It makes a lot of difference. Hopefully people can relate to it. And what we want to do here on sort of Bouncing Back is sort of create that safe space where people can share, and hopefully those that are watching can think, well, actually, I can take a little bit from that. And the reality is we're all human. We all have challenges in our life. And, there are tools in the box, things that might not work for everyone. But, as we go along and we share, hopefully people can bounce back and achieve huge personal growth. Thank you and goodbye.